guest from Lithuania. She's involved in organizational transformations and the transformation of people, and she devotes a lot of her time to education in Lithuania. She works with the children, she works with the parents and teachers. And she also does a lot of research into how to change people, how to change culture and attitudes, and how to change school itself for the better. We're going to help her with if she experiences any issues with translation. She's worked a lot in Ukraine, and many of you will have met her, will have attended her lectures and workshops. She's also helping our school develop, and she's working with our teachers, and I'm very honored and happy to introduce her. Thank you. It's indeed, it's a miracle that I'm here with you and to be with people that I haven't seen in 2-3 years who are gathered here to discuss something that is of concern to all of us. This is a great source of inspiration. And I thought that I would be open and honest with you. Open meaning that I might not have packed everything, packaged everything nicely, but I'll be completely honest with you. And I wanted to begin by giving you a little bit of background about myself. I was fascinated in childhood that I liked cleaning things and animals and kittens. Sometimes I would be invited to funerals to be with people experiencing grief, and I was always fascinated and attracted by the most complex. There was a period in my time when I was seriously researching into how terrorists operated, and I also researched things like brainwashing techniques, and I realized that I was not afraid in the face of some things that most people find despicable, and they really don't really want to see this, and I always look at this as an area for my research. And over the past several years I have been researching into illnesses, and we also launched a clinic for schools. We work with kids with group dynamics. We've been invited to schools, to classes that had become difficult to handle, to manage. And we have since been invited as supervisors, helping schools resolve the challenges that they face. We help by creating communities. We help by building constructive relationships between the teaching staff and the parents. So we are a clinic for schools, and last but not least, we've spent the past several months designing a national education strategy for Lithuania for all ages. And I'm not an expert in education, but I was invited because those experts had been exploring this and building their strategy for a year, but then they realized that that was not enough. Sometimes you need to look at a problem not as something very complex and difficult to address, but you should look at it as a challenge, as an opportunity. So I see a lot of potential for development in a school environment. If we learn to be more receptive, so we need to keep a close eye on any divisions and on things that start small, but then break apart the children from the parents, and then I'm not going to talk much about teaching science, but my presentation will present a new perspective, referred to as extended pedagogics. When we were analyzing options to build a strategy for the education system in Lithuania, we needed to find points of intervention, because we realized early on that we would not be able to attack all the problems, but we wanted to identify some areas to focus on where we could effect tangible change. Okay, so let me begin by calling the word VUCA. Those of you who've heard of it, this word is used to refer to all the complexities of this world. This term emerged to refer to this world being so complex and being so difficult to navigate through using sheer logic. One of the expectations that people hold about education, that they expect schools to prepare the kids for the future. So VUCA's job is to train up pilots, and those pilots who would find their own path, but also help others find theirs. That's why it's important for a school to embrace all these complexities and at the same time let go of heightened expectations and a heightened sense of responsibility for the outcomes of education. In this world, it's not only the teachers who play the dominant part in shaping school students. This presentation is written in English, but I will be using Russian. So how relevant is VUCA within education? Volatility, the first letter is V for volatility, so it arises out of the fact that never have emotions played such an important role in education as they do today. A lot of emotions. And they become increasingly an important factor at play if we know how to handle emotions, how to manage emotions. We will be successful as teachers. Whenever students lose interest, it's not an intellectual challenge, it's an emotional one. Whenever we are invited to a school where the climate is not healthy, we work to turn it around to create motivation. But this is something that we act on to increase motivation and involvement. And kids get readily involved, when they feel comfortable and safe together with their friends, when they are not afraid to make a mistake, and whenever a group works together and has some quest in front of them. And this presence of a quest is something that keeps up interest. When you are more excited about pursuing it than you are afraid of it. When excitement beats fear, and it's fear, guilt, whatever it might be. So this is volatile, the emotional component. And then again, we need to address the increasing expectations that people have from us, that they expect that the school will turn out a brand new individual, that will completely change that person by the time they graduate. And competition is another facet of volatility. It's become increasingly pronounced. Decades ago, competition was looked at as a positive force, but at the same time it was a source of much stress and pressure. So people willing to outperform one another, working hard to achieve their KPIs, and this kills the element, the presence of joy and excitement. And this gives rise to uncertainty, because there are so many innovations and there's so much contradictory information. How do you resolve this? Well, let's take any subject. You teach it one way, and then the next day the kids come with printouts from Google proving you wrong. But then it's a challenge, because we no longer operate in an environment where there is only one source of information. What gives rise to complexity? It's because this is the immediate result of low engagement. And so much is now happening outside the school walls, and those activities are so interesting. So school used to be one of the most interesting spaces where people went to find out more about the world around them. That is no longer the case. And there is this increasing speed and quantity of information being circulated. And what becomes particularly difficult is that the number and complexity of relations has increased exponentially. Some decades ago, only a handful of people had some influence on our formative years, but now we are woven into networks with hundreds, if not thousands of people. And ambiguity is the product of complexity, and the current age and current society so strongly footed in individuality. Everyone claims the right to be the way they wish to be. And we need to find a way of dealing with this. This gives rise to a variety of interpretations. And strange as it may sound, one of the sources, one of the key areas of ambiguity is human rights. I used to be a children's rights activist. This threw quite a number of challenges at me, and I even had to flee my country. But I met my husband when I was in exile, and he was also fighting to defend the rights of the child within the Catholic Church. So rights empower you, and the laws, the formal laws, increasingly lose power, and it becomes increasingly more difficult to agree on a single set of rules, of values, opening up a lot of new space for searching, when people are encouraged to search and find common ground. It's just by way of pretext and background what makes it so difficult now to operate in today's school environment. And any logical construct that you try to employ to rein in this complexity creates a lot of tension. So there is this sensation that you're doing something, and it actually makes sense what you're saying. You are saying the right things, but they're not the things that your audience wants to hear. That the children see no point in this, and wait a minute, this is geometry, this is chemistry. So what's in it for me is the question. But that is exactly the point. That is the challenge being thrown at you. What is the point of learning, of embracing these subjects? There was a big study done when we were developing the Lithuanian new strategy. It's not very new, it's been criticized, but I haven't come across a study project with a scope as broad as this one covered. This is a synthesis of 1,500 meta-analyses of 90,000 studies involving 300 million students. So it was a huge research project, and you don't have to squint to read the small font. I just wanted to leave you with this link. Some of you might find it useful to help you chart your way forward to upgrade your interactions with your students going forward. What makes this so unique and interesting? This analysis explored the factors that determine achievement, not as much triggering satisfaction, but what are the determinants of achievement? And it is quite interesting that the study came up with somewhat counterintuitive findings, in that some of the factors that we have long come to accept as being the key drivers are not really that crucial. I asked Svetlana to help me walk you through this chart just to give you some examples of how those factors manifest themselves. And the red ones are seriously obvious negative influence. The yellow color is a negative trend. So basically, if you allow this trend to develop, if you do not counter it, then it will go red. So green is you don't have to do anything. Light blue is a positive trend, and dark blue is a generally accepted positive factor promoting achievement. So as you can see here, it is really crucial that the student and their mindset is as important as all the work that school does and all the contribution from the parents. So the student himself or herself is the key determining factor. Certainly, the kids live and operate in an environment surrounded by other people. But what this goes to show that it's so important as you impart information to also supplement it with an opportunity for the child to find the answer to the question, why am I learning? Why am I studying? So this negative is a surface motivation. It's like if you read 3 pages, I'll buy you a toy. But it erodes your internal motivation. It does work, but in a negative way. And we've been looking at these examples to find some real-life examples. This is something that you've all experienced as teachers. It's when the parents set some objectives in front of their child and also in front of their teacher. Okay, you do this, we'll buy you a new iPhone, or you do this, we'll send you just to spend time with your friends or something. The child appears to be motivated, but it's not long-term motivation. That's why it's referred to as surface motivation. And surface motivation is capable of killing genuine long-term motivation. The next one is stereotype threat. It also works as a destructive factor. And what's behind it? It is the fear of giving the wrong answer. It is the stereotype that there is always the right answer and I must find it. And from a very early age, as your children observe your behavior and they are looking for the right answer, they're trying to, because they learn to believe that there is one right answer, and the parent really wants that. But it's now children are a lot more sensitive and capable of reading their environment, and to give them praise, to win praise, they react in a very nimble and very flexible fashion. Next comes boredom. This is often comes from a lack of challenge, mastery goals. It's a lot of research has shown that whenever a child is motivated, or else they tell you they're motivated by a desire to become the world's best mathematician or businessman, but this is not their natural wish to discover the world around them, but this revolves around their ego, and whatever is rooted in the ego does not really work over the long term. Lack of stress, it's not an insecure environment, but a lack of stress is just a lack of challenge in life. Okay, my motivation, I'm learning to get into university. It doesn't really motivate you. Just as we were discussing, this is an international study, but here in Ukraine, emotional security, acceptance, and showing affection for the children, all these are new concepts, but we need to strike, it's a fine balancing act between giving them security and at the same time encouraging them to act, to address challenges. This is quite tricky, and And our interventions in science are quite narrowly focused. It's whenever teachers work to help the students develop critical thinking. Instead of saying, when I drop a stone, it will fall to the ground, the teacher asks the question, is the stone going to drop? Okay, if I drop a ball or a balloon, will it drop to the ground? This is basically putting a question mark on things that appear to be obvious, constant, and that sort of rattles the cages of mental stereotypes. This is that's exactly what brings out critical thinking. Collective teacher efficacy. This is what Irena is very competent in. It's the work at the organization level. Children learn from adults. This is no secret. But when we want to encourage the kids to learn to be team players, but they actually read and browse those models from their environment. So to show that basically if the teachers are not a team, the kids will not learn to be team players either. And this is not as much a matter of, it's those kids that whenever they are exposed to teamwork, then they learn to be team players. Now, the next one is called the summer vacation effect. Which day of the week is a tragedy for teachers? Okay, Sunday, yeah. But it's one of the weekdays. Which is the hardest? Monday? Friday? When we were exploring this scale and this summer vacation effect and modifying school calendars, we realized that it was important. It was important to have a timetable, certainly, to share with the students. But whenever a teacher allows themselves to focus on specific kids, on specific classes, and this is what happens at our school, we never plan anything on Thursdays, because normally we know that Thursdays somehow don't work for us. So the students are all lost, and we reserve the right to keep Thursday in a state of flux. And and also during the retrograde phase of the planet Mercury. So that's okay. So the fact we have seen that there is this effect that's quite pronounced, summer vacation effect. You know this. You've got to allow yourselves to modify your timetables. You've got to have more flexibility in rescheduling activities. If you've noticed that some days simply do not work. Now, the home section, moving between schools is an important factor. Whenever kids are moved from school to school, too often we've had cases involving children changing schools 3 times a year. Certainly the parents are driven by the desire to find them the best school, but this kills the kids' motivation to build relationships, because they know that they'll be moved within months to another school, and they begin to believe that this is all temporary, so they are not achieving So the child is not achieving, and the parents are blaming the school. It's because you are so keen on finding the perfect school for your children, killing the motivation, and the kid develops this kind of frustration that nowhere is good enough for him or her. Now, television and the other parameters are also very important in a home and a family context, and it's about support, it's about a comfortable and secure environment. Now, let's now dig deeper. And I would like to share with you some of our definitions and terms. This is a book, it's an entire area of research within teaching science. It's very similar to democratic education, but they refer to it as expansive education. One that really tasks itself with teaching, to preparing the children for life. There are three important elements in this quote. Is the role of the teacher really changes. It evolves. It is evolving from a leadership role to more into a facilitation and mentorship role, and as a good coach, sometimes offering the students to stretch their mind, and that is exactly the kind of teacher that keeps asking the question, why learn, why go to school, what's in it for you? What did you feel when reading this text? When my daughter told me for the first time, look, Mom, I was lost in time, and I felt that girl was me, and I felt as though it was myself and my mom and dad, my parents, and I felt I enjoyed the reading so much. But she had read 50 books prior to that, and she hadn't liked any of them. We adults, we pick up a book, we don't like it, we drop it. But if we find a book that we can relate to, it's one. My French teacher, whenever he starts his class, they begin by learning spooky verses that the kids are so excited about learning that they want to tell those verses to all their friends. So expansive education is about empowering the students. It's a student-centered concept. Certainly, the teacher is always there. He or she even is elevated to a higher role, to a mentorship role. But some of these bullet points include the following ones: that students are involved in designing their lessons. Normally, it's been traditionally accepted that the teacher comes with a syllabus, with a teaching plan, and this concept turns things around, then with the teacher coming to the students and offering them to get involved in building a lesson by asking them questions about what's of interest to them. And this is how this lesson is built, constructed collectively. Some students help other students, and the teacher briefs them on how to instruct their fellow students, and they also work as research associates, if you will, and they are given specific tasks to find out, to explore certain subjects. So they pick up quite a large volume of the work being done. And what's really changing, and something that I really enjoy, that I would like to emphasize, that we used to go by very different principles. And if we were now to rush to the other extreme, none of it will work in a sustainable manner. It will not be sustainable, it will not be anything long-term. So we need to broaden the boundaries, and we need to just feel our way and find a way of expanding our education. And I'm going to walk you through some of the basic categories where you can introduce something new, how you can explore your own teaching experience. So it is an evolution to a mentorship role. And teachers should embark on different forms of setting homework, like a podcast based or something. Openness. All the teaching plans and syllabi become more open, and the students are more and more empowered to contribute. So the classroom itself evolves from a classroom to a workshop, and how we approach individual tasks, the balance between theory and practice. And knowledge, mostly it's about the skill of asking questions. It is a very powerful technique. And last but not least is the attitude to talent and abilities. And in the modern world of teaching science, it's there is the view that some can cut it and some simply can't. Somebody may be good at maths, and actually it spreads to the kids. But this a neuroplasticity of the brain, and all available research proves otherwise. And what needs to start changing slowly but steadily is that mistakes and failures are great prizes and bonuses. Let me give you one example. If there's been a fight, and then the two kids are blaming each other, this is good. This is something to discuss. The children go back home. So what happened? Nothing. Anything bad? Look, but you kids, what happened? Something must have happened. And all the attention is directed at things that we do not talk about. But if we start paying more and more attention, is this an interesting book? No, it isn't. How did you know? How did you find out it wasn't? Knowledge and skills are required. It's not something that children are born with. And if students are given a quest, something that they need to really work hard to accomplish. My daughter is not a mathematical mind, but we had a conversation in our family circle about how the brain works and what failures actually mean. So when it's now that she's embraced this, that failure is an opportunity. Now she's completely changed her attitude towards maths. Now this is her favorite subject. Whenever we speak about development as a lifelong commitment, and here's how adults develop, and this ties in neatly with previous slides. development occurs whenever an adult, not necessarily an adult, but that they have heat experiences. Those are the challenges that people face every once in a while, and they begin exploring those challenges. And so what happens when we fail? So whenever I've failed, whenever I've made a mistake, the so-called embarrassment compass kicks into life, and it turns on a number of strategies. That is exactly why students do not wish to be involved, because they're suffering from embarrassment, and they just don't want to make matters worse for themselves. This is how it works. It can begin in a variety of ways. If I'm faced with a difficult challenge, the first thing that I do is I call myself a fool. You see? I'm going to fail. I feel frustrated with myself. Maybe I feel I don't have enough time. So it all begins with this kind of inward aggression. But then the next phase, okay, you just leave me alone. Self-attack, victimizing, then denial. Okay, I'm out of here. And this is when it gets interesting. So, after this denial phase, I cut myself off from the rest of society because I feel that I've offended everyone. So I quit. I'm out of here. And interestingly enough, to go back to the previous phase. So there comes this moment of turning off emotions. It's when I begin to feel that I need to pull off something completely extraordinary. And I go, Mom, I'm going to clean the whole house on Saturday. Next week, I'm going to spend 17 hours reading. Next year, you'll see, I'll be at the top of my class. But all this eventually leads to the frustration that that is not achievable. I acknowledge, I admit early on that that is not doable, and then it goes back into this vicious cycle, isolating, running, I'm bad, self-attack, denial, blaming others, and then it circles and circles and circles. This is just the kind of dynamic. It's not an answer to all those questions, but this is how human nature works when confronted with a challenge. It's something that children that wish to explore the world, they then become completely closed. This world has never had so much shame, so much pride, because we live in an environment with very high expectations. We've got to become top-notch professionals and be kind and compassionate people and love nature. And the bar has been set so high. And this creates enormous pressure. And it's never... We've never had so many kids with high anxiety levels. We haven't had ever in the history of mankind so many cases of suicide among children, because it is very hard to accept the frustration that I'm never good enough, I simply don't have space for it. So I would like to ask every one of you, I'm going to implore you, get familiar with the concepts of growth mindset versus fixed mindsets. So there's loads of videos on YouTube on how this has affected children, and in particular those disenfranchised children coming from poor backgrounds and maybe suffering from some disabilities, mental, physical. This has actually helped bring back faith with those kids going, look, it's not me who's failing, it's not that I'm bad. I haven't trodden a path in my head, in my mind, for this tractor, for this whatever it might be. And any failure is simply there to show me that I haven't yet learned to grow this particular flower, to build this machine. I'm learning from my failures because they are paving the path to development, to success. And this is it's a quote from Positive Psychology by a Stanford a researcher by the name Carol Dweck, who was researching into the way mindsets affect people's sense of self and achievement. And she moved on to work with many schools, and it is enough to change your perspective on education, on the learning process, from a result-oriented one to a process-driven one. That any mistake, any failure, any imperfection is an opportunity to find the answers we're looking for. And what's really crucial, she argues, for teachers is to use the word opportunity in moderation, because it's often mistaken for talent, and that begins to constrain people because they feel that they must have talent. So what next? Why don't you design a poster for your classroom about the kinds of strategies that we use? Because so what helps us out of this sense of guilt, what helps us get out of the mood where we want to escape, whenever you fail, you add something to it. I have failed for now. I have failed for the time being, something like this. Play out your failures. Hold your fuck-up nights with your parents. Explore your failures. Even come up with imaginary failures and design strategies to address them. I believe that each and every child, it's important to have this kind of honest conversation with your children. Build a list of tragedies that have happened to you or may happen to you. How would you respond? How have you responded? And I would like to end on this note. And now I would like to leave you with this quote by Nietzsche. Then one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. And this, the only way to embrace all this complexity, let go of control. Don't try to control this very complex reality. Be like birds. They hover. They pick up air currents and they float on those currents. They hover and float on those currents. So what becomes really crucial is to learn to see and listen. And this opens up. Often in a school environment, when we walk into a school, we spend 2 hours listening to music with the students, nothing else. Why? To gradually let go of all those stereotypical modes of conversation and questions, to let go of all that and open your mind. Sometimes it takes more than listening to music, sometimes it takes a bit of dancing. And I'm not advising that you do exactly that, but what we lose in this environment, we sometimes lose trust, openness and joy, unless we let go of all this. Questions now. No questions? All right then. I'm not sure if it's available in the Russian language, but in English there's a lot of material with textbooks and posters. If you type in Big Life Journal into your search engine, it might come up with something in either Russian or Ukrainian. Thank you for your attention. Have a good day.